Boa tarde. Em nome do reitor da Universidade de Lisboa, professor António Cruz Serra, declaro aberta a cerimónia de atribuição do doutoramento Honoris Causa ao professor Alvin Roth. A sessão irá agora decorrer em inglês. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Rector of Universidade de Lisboa, Professor António Cruz Serra, I hereby declare the opening of the ceremony for the award of Doctor Honoris Causa to Professor Alvin Roth. The nominator, Professor Joana Pais, will now commend the laureate.
Magnificent Rector of Universidade de Lisboa, Professor António Cruz Serra, esteemed Dean of ISEG, Professor Clara Raposo, honored guests, dear members of the academic community, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me express my sincere appreciation for the honor I have been given to talk about Professor Alvin Roth's work. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to have Professor Roth here today. Professor Alvin Roth was born in New York, in 1951. In 1968, at the age of 16, he entered Columbia University's engineering school, where he also studied operations research. After graduating from Columbia, he moved to Stanford University in 1971, when he was only 19 years old, to pursue his PhD in Stanford's Department of Operations Research. After taking a class from Michael Mashler, he developed a strong interest in game theory and decided to do research in this topic. Robert Bob Wilson became his advisor at Stanford, and Professor Alvin Roth wrote his thesis on models of games with transferable utility and explored a generalization of the von Neumann-Morgenstern stable sets. He then joined the University of Illinois in 1974, where he continued to push the theory of game theory forward, in particular by exploring models formulated by Lloyd Shapley. Moreover, he started doing laboratory experiments in game theory. In 1982, he joined the economics department at the University of Pittsburgh. By this time, he had already become interested in the design of the medical match, a clearinghouse used for placing new American doctors into hospitals. This clearinghouse had been created in the early 50s to organize a market that didn't work well, given the intense competition among hospitals for short or inadequate supply of interns, which led hospitals to try to fill their positions as early as possible, to such an extent that offers were at some point being made up to 2 years before graduation. Professor Alvin Roth showed that the algorithm, the rules that govern the functioning of this clearinghouse, that the algorithm that this medical match used produced the same outcome as the algorithm that was described in a 1962 paper by David Gale and Lloyd Shapley. Professor Alvin Roth then continued his theoretical and empirical investigations of matching and clearinghouses, explaining the reasons for the success of some and the failure of others, and was involved in the design of several markets. In 1998, he moved with his family to Boston, where he took a position at Harvard, splitting his time between the Department of Economics and Harvard Business School, only to return to Stanford 14 years later in 2012. This was also the year in which he was awarded the Bank of Sweden Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. He shared this prize with Lloyd Shapley. The Nobel's committee's citation noted their theory of stable allocations and the practice of market design. Professor Alvin Roth is nowadays the Craig and Susan McCaw Professor of Economics and the Gund Professor of Economics and Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard University. He was the president of the American Economic Association last year, in 2017. He has received many honors, and he's a Nobel laureate. Along the way, he dropped out of high school at 16. He failed one of his PhD qualifying exams, and he wrote a PhD thesis in a topic which, in his own words, would turn out to be a dead end in game theory. And this is all the information I could gather from his CV of failures. Taking into account the title of the book, Who Gets What and Why, By the way, this is a fascinating and very accessible book. It has been translated to 15 or I think 16 languages, and Professor Alvin Roth is in fact the author of this book. There must be a reason for so many recognitions and honors. Well, Professor Alvin Roth started as a theorist, trying to push game theory further. At the same time, he kept an eye on putting theory into practice. He was wise to recognize that there were pressing real-life problems that his theory could help solving. Of course, theory was not enough, and he also needed the help of others to pursue such a daunting task. So he gathered different tools, laboratory experiments, computational methods, empirical analysis, and a team of clever, creative, devoted, and inspired by all researchers that helped him in building the bridge between his own words, again, because I like his words very much, simple theory and messy detail. What follows is a non-exhaustive list of practical problems Professor Alvin Roth and his team helped solving, and that may give a glimpse of the outreach of his contribution. They all fall into the category of market design, which implies thinking about the detailed rules of marketplaces, how they interact with markets and change their performance. So, Professor Alvin Roth had the first opportunity to put market design into practice while at Pittsburgh when he was asked to collaborate in the redesign of the medical match. The algorithm that was developed then was used by a number of clearinghouses for more senior medical positions and other centralized labor markets. Nowadays, this medical match alone handles applications from more than 40,000 doctors to more than 30,000 positions at hospitals every year. Doctors and positions at hospitals is just one example of a matching market, which differs from other markets, like commodity markets, in that prices have only a limited role, if any role at all, to play in making the two sides of the market meet. So, school choice, assigning children to schools, or college admissions, assigning students to universities, are other matching problems. Again, money does not play a role here. For Professor Alvin Roth, the opportunity to design the school choice system came in 2003 with New York City. New York City Department of Education asked for his help in the matching of students to public high schools. After New York came the city of Boston and other cities, Denver, New Orleans, and many others. Inspired by the work of Professor Alvin Roth, school choice and college admissions is now under discussion outside the US, in Europe, and in other countries, like China, for example. And China, well, we have big numbers in China. So in China alone, each year, approximately 10 million high school students compete for 6 million seats at universities. So this is a big market. A last example, kidney exchange. After the first kidney exchange took place in the US in 2000, Professor Alvin Roth, who already knew how to organize a large-scale trade among people dealing with indivisible goods without money, started working on algorithms for kidney exchange among patient-donor pairs. The need for kidney exchange comes from blood and tissue incompatibility. In many cases, the donor, the living donor, is incompatible with his beloved one, and the opportunity for exchange with another incompatible pair appears. With the help of surgeon Frank Delmonico, they formed the New England Program for Kidney Exchange. Today in the US, there are 3 large exchanges that organize kidney chains across hospitals. In 2015, there were about 600 kidney pair donation transplantations in the US. In 2000, there had been only 2. National exchanges are in place in the UK, Canada, the Netherlands, and pair donations have taken place in many other places, like Portugal, for example. Professor Alvin Roth has recently been working on global kidney exchange, expanding living renal transplantation internationally to patients from less developed countries without financial means. So, what kind of work did Professor Alvin Roth do to deserve a Nobel Prize and so many honors? The topic he has worked on touches people's lives in very important moments. His work helps students find the right school, new doctors find their first job, kidney disease patients to find a donor. I believe his work also changes the way people think about economics and the economists. Economists like Alvin Roth actually saved his lives. Saved lives, you didn't listen to him. So, I request that the title of Honorary Doctor be conferred to Alvin Elliot Roth by Universidade de Lisboa as acknowledgement of his merit and devotion to the fundamental values of economics and of the university.
The Rector of Universidade de Lisboa, Professor António Cruz Serra, will proceed to the conferment for the award of Doctor Honoris Causa to Professor Alvin Roth. I now ask the audience to rise.
Okay, I do it from here. As Rector of the University of Lisbon, I declare Doctor Honoris Causa by our university, Professor Alvin Roth. Thank you. So, thank you, Rector Cruz, President Raposo, Professor Pais, professors, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today at the University of Lisbon, where I'll also attend tomorrow the 10th anniversary of a game theory conference that you've been hosting here that has become a very important academic event in the world. So it's a special pleasure to be here. And what I want to talk to you very briefly about today are about markets and marketplaces. And incidentally, I've never been able to understand why economics sometimes has the reputation of being a boring subject. Because when I look around at markets and marketplaces, I think of economics as being a high form of gossip that allows you to see how other people live their lives and think about how you might have lived your life if you'd made different choices, and sometimes even to give you advice on what choices you make. So I think it's not a boring subject at all. And as Joanna mentioned, I recently wrote a book about market design called Who Gets What and Why. And its Portuguese translation, I'm not going to do well at pronunciation here, has the title Como Funcionam os Mercados, which I guess means how markets work, which isn't a bad translation, especially if mercados means the concrete marketplaces in which markets take place, rather than the abstract idea of markets that we economists sometimes talk about. Because what market design is about is thinking about marketplaces and how they succeed or fail. And while market design is a relatively new part of academic economics, it's an ancient human activity. When archaeologists find stone tools distributed far from where they were quarried and made, it means that our prehistoric ancestors knew something about trade even before they learned to write. And so markets are a little bit like languages. They're both ancient human artifacts They're tools that we use to coordinate and cooperate with each other. And we sometimes think of both languages and markets as immutable parts of the environment, but they're both artifacts. They're both things that we make and have some control over. And just as there are many different languages, there are also many different kinds of markets. So I think that when people think about markets and marketplaces, they often think of stock exchanges and commodity markets. And those are great inventions because in a commodity market, like a financial securities market, you don't care who you're trading with. The commodities are well enough defined so that it doesn't matter who you buy from or sell to. When you want to buy 100 shares of stock on the New York Stock Exchange, you don't care whether the person who you're buying it from has taken good care of those shares, and they don't care whether you're going to take good care of those shares. And once you've decided on the company you want shares in, you don't care which shares you get because they're all the same. So commodities are a great invention because they allow commodity markets to just involve prices. But many markets don't just involve prices. And in lots of markets, you can't trade anonymously with anyone else in the market because you care who you transact with. You're trying to make a match. And matching markets, which I spend a lot of time studying, are markets where you can't just choose what you want, even if you can afford it. You also have to be chosen. So of course, university admissions are matching markets. You can't just come to study at the University of Lisbon or Stanford University, where I teach. You have to be accepted. Okay? Stanford doesn't fill its seats by raising the tuition until just enough people want to come, until supply equals demand. Lots of people would like to come and study at most universities, but you can't come and study unless you're admitted. Labor markets are matching markets. You can't just show up to work at Google. You have to be hired. And Google can't just decide who will work there. They have to compete with Facebook and other employers. So matching markets are a little bit like marriage. You can't just choose your spouse. You also have to be chosen. And so some courtship is required. And matching markets aren't just responsible for prices, they're responsible for making matches. So they can't just do price discovery, they need other institutions like admissions committees or job interviews or applications to a university. They need other institutions to help clear the market. Now, one of the things about markets and marketplaces is they're becoming more ubiquitous and closer to us. Right? Computers have changed the way marketplaces work quite a bit. I have in my pocket a smartphone which allows me to interact with many marketplaces at any time of the day or night. I could stand up here and buy an airline ticket or a hotel room or a pair of shoes just by using my phone. And so while markets are ancient human artifacts, we have never been as close to them as we now are. And of course, one of the things to think about there is that technology changes how marketplaces work. So Amazon is a big store on which you can buy anything. It depended on the internet in order to exist. People had to be able to make orders from far away after searching through the many items that Amazon sells. But the internet wasn't a sufficient technology for a marketplace like Uber. Uber needs smartphones. When you want to order a ride in a car, your phone has to know where you are and where the cars are so that they can find the closest car to you. So some of these new marketplaces that we're seeing are a result or are only possible because of the new technologies that we're seeing. And technologies are changing the way marketplaces work. So let's think a little bit about what marketplaces have to do to help markets succeed. And to give the example, I'm going to give an example that I think illustrates things that every marketplace has to do, but I'll use as my example another new marketplace, which is Airbnb. Okay, if I wanted to get a room in Lisbon, I could do it through Airbnb. So the first problem Airbnb had was to make the market thick. They had to get lots of travelers and hosts. So in fact, Airbnb started as a website in San Francisco. And the way they grew initially, the first problem they had was to grow, and the way they grew was to buy other similar websites. Crashpadder in London, for example, was an early one. And that way, once they bought that, they had travelers in London who could find rooms in San Francisco, and travelers in San Francisco could find rooms in London. And it started to become a more useful site to go to. And today, of course, their competitors aren't other websites. Their competitors are big hotel chains. So as they became a thick market, they had to deal with a problem that comes from thick markets with lots of people in them, which is congestion. Okay? It used to be harder than it is now to secure a room on Airbnb. And to understand the way it's hard, imagine the problem that hotels would have if, like Airbnb, they could only deal with you one room at a time. Supposing if I wanted a room at the Intercontinental Hotel in Lisbon, I had to call up and name a specific room, right? This is the problem that Airbnb has because many of its hosts only operate one apartment or one guest room. So I would call up the Intercontinental Hotel and I'd say, do you have a room for me for tomorrow night? And they'd say, well, which room do you want? I'd say, well, how about room 1234? And they'd say, so sorry, that room is taken. And then as I said into the phone, don't hang up, the receptionist would hang up, and I would have to call back and say, how about room 1236? And she'd say, room 1236 is available. So it would be much tougher to find a hotel room if the receptionist at the hotel couldn't see all the rooms at the same time and tell me which ones are vacant. But that's the problem that Airbnb had to overcome, because if you try to reserve my guest room, if I had a guest room in California, and someone had already reserved it, I would have to say to you, I'm so sorry, that room's already been reserved, and then you'd have to start again. So Airbnb has come a long way since those early days. If someone applies to reserve my guest room, it will immediately disappear from your app and your computer so that you won't find yourself in a queue trying to reserve the same room that other people are. But that's a problem in market design. They've constantly had to try to make it easier to find the rooms given the special congestion problems they have. And finally, all marketplaces have to make the markets safe and simple and reliable. And part of safety on a site like Airbnb is both the hosts and the travelers have reputations. So you have some reason to believe, if I show a picture of my guest room in California, you have some reason to believe that when you arrive, the actual room will look like the picture, because as an experienced host, I would have a reputation, and previous guests would have noticed if the picture weren't accurate. And similarly, as a host, I should look at you and know that you know how to be a guest, that you've been a guest successfully before. So what marketplaces have to do is they have to help make the market become thick, they have to deal with the resulting congestion, and they have to make the marketplace transactions safe. So let me give you an example of what it means not to be safe. And Joanna mentioned that one of the things I've worked on is school choice. Let me tell you how schools used to be assigned in Boston. No longer so, but this is how they used to be assigned. The city, the school district, would give each child a priority at each school. Children who lived close to the school had some priority. Children who had an older sibling already attending the school had some priority. And there were tiebreakers, random numbers that gave priorities as well. And the city would ask the families to tell the city, what's your first choice school? What's your second choice? What's your third choice? So you would fill out a rank order list saying which choice, how you liked the schools, first choice, second choice, third choice, and so forth. And then the city tried to do something very well-intentioned. They tried to give as many families as possible their first choice. So they would look at all the first choice applications, and if some schools had more applications than they had places, they would order the students in order of priority and give the places to the highest priority students, as many as they could. And then, after they had done this with all the schools, they would look at the remaining families and they would try to give as many of them as possible their second choices. And after they had done that, they would try to give as many of the remaining families as possible their third choices. So you can see this is a very well-intentioned system. It's trying to give families what they want. So why didn't it work? It didn't work because it wasn't safe for families to actually, honestly tell the city which schools were their first choice and second choice and third choice. Why not? Because under that old system, if you didn't get your first choice, it was very likely that your second choice would have already filled all of its seats with students who had asked for it as their first choice. And so even if your child had a very high priority at your second choice, that isn't the school you would go to. Instead, you would drop down through your list until you eventually got assigned to a school that had empty seats after everyone had gotten their first choice and second choice and third choice and so on. And those weren't the most desirable schools. And so this system caused families to face a tough strategic problem. They had to think not, what's my favorite school and my second favorite? They had to think, what's the best school I can get for my child if I claim it's my first choice? Okay, and that's a very different problem. So today in Boston and in a number of other American cities, we've managed to solve that problem so that if you don't get your first choice, your chance of getting your second choice is just as high as if you had listed it as your first choice. And in this way, we make it possible for families to reveal their true preferences, which also help in planning building future schools or enlarging them and things like that. So this is why game theorists get involved in thinking about the rules of the game. Those are game theoretic questions. Let me tell you just about one more market that I've been involved in, which involves kidney transplantation. So Portugal is one of the countries that leads the world in recovering deceased donor organs for transplantation. And the issue about kidneys, kidney failure, incidentally, is one of the big causes of death in the world, the 9th or 10th biggest cause of death in the world. And we can keep people alive on dialysis, but that's no cure. Dialysis is tough. You incur a lot of harm while you're on dialysis. It's dangerous. And in all the world, even in countries like Portugal, where you do such an excellent job of recovering deceased donor organs, there are not enough organs for transplant, so many people die while waiting. But transplantation is the treatment of choice. Now, the special thing about kidneys is that healthy people have 2 of them and can remain healthy with 1. So if you're healthy enough, you might be able to give a kidney to someone you love who is suffering from kidney failure, and that would save their life, and it would be a great thing to do. But kidney transplants are matching markets. You can't just give a kidney to someone you love, even if you're healthy enough to give a kidney, because kidneys have to be well matched. So sometimes it happens that you want to give a kidney to someone who you love. You're healthy enough to give someone a kidney, but you can't give it to the person you love. And before there was kidney exchange, we used to have to say to these donors, I'm sorry, you can't give a kidney. And they would go home, and their intended recipient would continue to wait for a deceased donor kidney. And there simply aren't enough deceased donor kidneys. But what kidney exchange does is it says, suppose you want to give a kidney to someone you love, but you can't. And I want to give a kidney to someone I love, but I can't. We can now look through the thick market of all such patient-donor pairs and see whether maybe I could give a kidney to your patient and you could give a kidney to my patient. And through that simple kind of exchange, we would get 2 more transplants to happen than would otherwise have happened. And in the United States, we've been doing kidney exchange since 2000, and it's become a standard form of transplantation. The first kidney exchange in Portugal was done in 2013. It's still small in Portugal, but growing. And the reason that's important is that even in Portugal, the place where deceased donation is the highest in the world in per million population, there aren't enough deceased donor organs, because it's very hard to die in a way that makes your organs still available for transplantation. Now, notice that in a kidney exchange, no money changes hands. In almost all the world, we have laws against buying a kidney for transplantation. Okay? The single exception is the Islamic Republic of Iran, where they have a monetary market for kidneys. But everywhere else in the world, it's illegal, although there are many black markets. So this has brought me to another area of study, because kidneys are not special in this sense. Turns out there are lots of what I'll call repugnant transactions. And a repugnant transaction is a transaction that some people would like to engage in, but other people think they shouldn't be allowed to. And we're all familiar with repugnant transactions. I'll give you some examples. And they're important because markets need social support. So if transactions are repugnant enough, we tend not to want to support markets in them, just as we do not support monetary markets for kidneys in most of the world. So let's think about some repugnant transactions that you're all familiar with. And when I say repugnant, I'm not prejudging. I'm not saying you don't like these transactions. I'm saying a transaction is repugnant if some people would like to engage in it and other people think they shouldn't. So one that has recently led to lots of political changes around the world is same-sex marriage. Two people would like to marry each other. Other people think they shouldn't be allowed to. In Portugal and in the United States, the laws have changed in recent memory so that same-sex marriage is now legal. But there are still places where it's not. And even in places where it is, like the United States, there are still people who are offended by the idea. So these can be big issues that affect people's lives. Let's think of some other repugnant transactions. Surrogacy is legal in California, where I live. Reliable legal contracts will allow you to pay someone to bear a child for you and to have your name on the birth certificate, the California birth certificate, as the legal parent. In Portugal, surrogacy is available in a much more limited way, and you cannot pay the surrogate. So there's much less surrogacy in Portugal than in California. And in some places in Europe, surrogacy is simply illegal. But in lots of places, you can't pay. So one of the characteristics, one of the interesting regularities we see when we think about repugnant transactions is there are some things that aren't repugnant, at least aren't legally repugnant, when they're done for free, but become repugnant when money changes hands. So surrogacy is like that in many European countries. Surrogacy is legal, but it's not legal to pay the surrogate. Kidney transplantation is like that, as I already explained. It's a great thing to give someone a kidney, and you can do that if you're healthy enough, if your kidneys are functioning well. But it's a crime in most places to sell your kidney or to buy it. So there's lots of things that we still don't understand about markets and marketplaces, how they garner support, which things allow support, and what we can do about those things that we think shouldn't have support. So, for example, one kind of repugnant transaction that around the world we have failed to eliminate is the market for illegal narcotics. So in the United States, we deal with it with what we call a war on drugs, and we have 60,000 overdose deaths a year. Here in Portugal, where you've decriminalized narcotics, you have many fewer overdose deaths. So we can learn from each other about how to deal with things that we find repugnant, even if we find different things repugnant. So let me close just with two remarks. So free markets, sometimes when people talk about free markets, they talk about them as if markets are constructed without human intervention. And that's, of course, silly. Uber is a company. The New York Stock Exchange is a company. Markets are tools that we build. And because they're tools that we build, we have a responsibility to fix them when they're broken. Markets are tools that we make to cooperate with each other and coordinate with each other. And when they're not working well, we should fix them. Thank you.
On behalf of the Rector of Universidade de Lisboa, Professor António Cruz Serra, I declare the end of this ceremony. We invite all of you for a Porto wine and for the compliment session with the laureates outside this auditorium. I now ask the professors to follow the Rector in procession while leaving the room.